This lecture is about the layers of the skin, the largest organ of the body. Take a moment to review the objectives for this lecture. What you will see is that we're very much focusing on the 5 layers of the skin. I'll speak briefly about the dermis and the hypodermis. The skin is composed of 2 main layers, the epidermis, made of closely packed epithelial cells, and the dermis, made of dense, irregular connective tissue that houses the blood vessels, hair follicles, sweat glands, and other structures. Beneath the dermis lies the hypodermis, which is composed mainly of loose, connective, and fatty tissue. The epidermis is composed of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. It is made of 4 or 5 layers of epithelial cells, depending on its location in the body. It doesn't have blood vessels within it, so it's avascular. Skin that has 4 layers of cells is referred to as thin skin. From deep to superficial, these layers are the stratum basal, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, and stratum corneum. Most of the skin can be classified as thin skin. Thick skin is found only on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. It has a 5th layer called the stratum lucidum, located between the stratum corneum and stratum granulosum. Take a moment to look at these slides. They display both thin skin and thick skin. The epidermis is epithelium composed of multiple layers of cells. The basal layer consists of cuboidal cells, whereas the outer layer are squamous keratinized cells. So the whole epithelium is often described as being keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium. The cells in all of the layers, except for the stratum basal, are called keratinocytes. A keratinocyte is a cell that manufactures and stores the protein keratin. Keratin is an intracellular fibrous protein that gives hair, nails, and skin their hardness and water-resistant properties. The cells in the different layers of the epidermis originate from the basal cells located in the stratum basal. Yet the cells of each layer are distinctly different, and these are what we'll be looking at. The top layer, the stratum corneum, is the most superficial layer of the epidermis, and it's the layer that's exposed to the environment. The increased keratinization, also called cornification, of the cells in this layer give its name. There are usually 15 to 30 layers of cells in the stratum corneum. This dry, dead layer helps prevent the penetration of microbes and the dehydration of underlying tissues, and it provides mechanical protection against abrasions for the more delicate underlying layers. Cells in this layer are shed periodically and are replaced by cells pushed up from the stratum granulosum, or the stratum lucidum in the case of the palms and the soles of the feet. The entire layer is replaced in a period of about 4 weeks. Cosmetic procedures such as microdermabrasion help remove some of the dry upper layer and aim to keep the skin looking fresh and healthy. The next layer, the stratum lucidum, is a smooth, seemingly translucent layer of epidermis located just above the stratum granulosum and below the stratum corneum. This thin layer of cells is found only in the thick skin of the palm, soles, and digits. The stratum granulosum has a grainy appearance due to the further changes in the keratinocytes as they are pushed from the stratum spinosum. The cells, 3 to 5 layers deep, become flatter, their cell membranes thicken, and they generate large amounts of the protein keratin, which are fibrous. The next layer, the stratum spinosum, as the name suggests, is spiny in appearance due to the protruding cell processes that join the cells via a structure called a desmosome. The desmosomes interlock with each other and strengthen the bond between the cells. It's interesting to note that the spiny nature of this layer is the artifact of the staining process. The stratum basal also is the deepest epidermal layer and attaches the epidermis to the basal lamina, below which lie the layers of the dermis. The cells in the stratum basal bond to the dermis via intertwining collagen fibers, referred to as basement membrane. A finger-like projection or fold known as the dermal papilla is found in the superficial portion of the dermis. The stratum basal is a single layer of cells primarily made up of basal cells. A basal cell is a cuboidal shaped stem cell that's a precursor of the keratinocytes of the epidermis. All of the keratinocytes are produced from this single layer of cells, which are constantly going through mitosis to produce new cells. Two other cells are found dispersed among the basal cells in the stratum basal. The first is Merkel cells, which function as a receptor and are responsible for stimulating sensory nerves that the brain perceives as touch. These cells are especially abundant on the surface of the hands and feet. The second is the melanocyte, a cell that produces the pigment melanin. Melanin gives hair and color and skin its color, and it also helps protect the living cells of the epidermis from ultraviolet radiation exposure. In a growing fetus, fingerprints form where the cells of the stratum basal meet the papilla of the underlying dermal layer, resulting in the formation of the ridges on your fingers that you recognize as fingerprints. Let's look briefly at the layers of the dermis. If you will refer to this slide, the stained slide shows two components of the dermis, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Both are made of connective tissue, with fibers of collagen extending from one to the other, making the border between the two somewhat indistinct. The dermal papilla extending into the epidermis belong to the papillary layer, whereas the dense collagen fiber bundles below belong to the reticular layer. The dermis really might be considered the core of the integumentary system, as distinct from the epidermis and the hypodermis. It contains blood and lymph vessels, nerves, and other structures such as hair follicles and sweat glands. The dermis is made of two layers of connective tissues that compose an interconnected mesh of elastin and collagen fibers produced from fibroblasts. Remember, there's two layers, papillary layer and reticular layer. The elastin fibers provide some elasticity to the skin, enabling movement. The collagen fibers provide structure and tensile strength, with strands of collagen extending into both of the papillary layer and the hypodermis. And the hypodermis, also called the subcutaneous layer or the superficial fascia, is a layer directly below the dermis, and it serves to connect the skin to the underlying fascia or the fibrous tissue of the bones and muscles. It's not strictly a part of the skin, although the border between the hypodermis and the dermis can be difficult to distinguish. The hypodermis consists of well-vascularized, loose areola, connective tissue, and adipose tissue, which functions as a mode of fat storage and provides insulation and cushioning for the integument. The color of the skin is influenced by a number of pigments, including melanin, keratin, and hemoglobin. Recall that melanin is produced by the cells called melanocytes, which are found scattered throughout the stratum basal of the epidermis. The melanin is transferred into the keratinocytes via a cellular vesicle called a melanosome. Melanin occurs in two primary forms. Dark-skinned individuals produce more melanin than those with pale skin. Exposure to UV rays of the sun or a tanning salon causes melanin to be manufactured and built up in the keratinocytes. Too much sun exposure can eventually lead to wrinkling due to the destruction of cellular structure of the skin, and in severe cases can cause sufficient DNA damage to result in skin cancer. When there is an irregular accumulation of melanocytes in the skin, freckles appear. Moles are larger masses of melanocytes, And although most are benign, they should be assessed for changes that might indicate the presence of cancer. So, as you can note on this slide, that they really do range in the size and really their presentation. So, one of the things we do as primary care providers is we assess lesions, freckling, and moles, or any other abnormal lesion. So you should really understand the process of the formation of these moles. Thank you for your attention.